You're woman of the house. You should anticipate these things, you know.
Love your neighbor as you love yourselves. You should have neighbor. It's also like my sister.
Hold it! Me! I don't come out my hand from oil bunkering.
General, what you going to yarn? What did the yarn say? I don't understand though.
Because they spoil our water and our environment. And they cause our people serious harm. Militants said, you know good. Me! I not do again Sam. Because why? Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Welcome to Nationwide. Good to have you join us for another interesting broadcast. I am Lydia Odije Ochi. President Muhammadu Buhari has renewed his appeal to the People's Republic of China for adequate support towards the execution of the Mambila hydropower project, which he described as a key priority of his administration. The president made the plea at the bilateral meeting with President Xi Jinping at the Great Hall of the People. And still from China, Nigeria and the People's Republic of China have signed 2 new agreements aimed at strengthening and expanding their mutually beneficial collaboration and cooperation in critical sectors for enhanced socio-economic development. This was the outcome of the high-level talks between President Muhammadu Buhari and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in Beijing. By the year 2020, China is projected to emerge as the largest economy in the world, on whom many African countries depend on for technological and infrastructural development. But what are the internal dynamics that make China the center for world attraction? These and many other questions were what guests on NTA's Tuesday Live sought to unravel. Momso Demiendati brings us details.
Infrastructure, power, human capacity development, transportation and humanitarian support, resulting in technological advancement and growth are many of the benefits Africa and Nigeria in particular enjoy in bilateral relations with China. But while President Buhari is currently deliberating with the Chinese community on sustaining the mutual relations and the recent approval of additional $60 billion to enhance Africa's growth, experts consider it pertinent to critically analyze the pros and cons.
A mutually beneficial relationship based on respect, based on cooperation in terms of deepening people-to-people contracts, government-level contracts, and it is essentially driven by the philosophy of the Chinese government of non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries.
Significantly, 70% of it is toward sustainable infrastructure that have internal return capacity, meaning it is not just a debt burden, but it's a sustainable infrastructure that has the capacity to generate enough resources to liquidate the debt.
We can come to conclusion that when China says this is win-win, it's not rhetoric, it's not politics.
True, that the relations may be mutually beneficial for both parties, but Nigeria must adapt some strategies and lessons to actualize her quest for economic independence and development.
Reaching out to China is a strategic decision that the government must take. Look at the consequences, determine the trajectory of this relationship, and decide to take the plunge.
The Chinese have achieved what they have achieved by extremely disciplined and sustainable long-term development planning culture. And unfortunately, we have the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. It is a strategy document. It's not a medium-term national development plan.
National planning, like he said, discipline, all this can only be imposed. All these things can be cultivated by a developmental, focused, credible state with integrity.
Experts are emphatic on the need to tread with caution.
The fact that they are not going to interfere in the politics of the partners is something that I find it difficult to believe, because there is no difference between the two. Okay. Both economic diplomacy and political diplomacy, they always go simultaneously.
There is, however, an assurance from President Muhammadu Buhari that there won't be any financial indebtedness resulting from the relations. In Abuja, Momso Damien Ati, NTA News.
Still concerning China, the just concluded Forum on China and Africa Cooperation (FOCAC) and the resolutions and agreements reached between China and African nations, including Nigeria, should be seen as a win-win situation for all nations concerned. This was the consensus of guests on Good Morning Nigeria, who dismissed the idea that China's growing influence on the African continent is just another form of colonialism. Dennis Adegunloye has more.
Bilateral relations between African nations and Nigeria in particular with China go back decades, and with the Asian nation now a global economic power, the gains of the agreements reached at the Forum on China and Africa Cooperation (FOCAC), according to the guests, far outweigh the perceived negatives. This is in view of the $60 billion that the Chinese government will make available to African countries for developmental purposes.
Quite a lot is going on across Africa, especially in rail, roads and power and other infrastructure that is being funded through this.
And the most important aspect is that it is also linked to the National Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. You know, Nigeria is the country concerned that identifies the project and then engages the Chinese.
We are thinking in terms of what will be beneficial. So the relationship they are trying to establish is that is based on exploitation of the Africans, but that will also contribute to the development of Africa.
The guests also allayed fears of possible debt traps that African nations may fall into.
President Xi Jinping also announced that the loans for some poor countries, the poorest countries, so to say, in Africa, that was due for 2019 would be shelved.
I don't think we really should be worried, because the new $60 billion that the Chinese government has pledged, you know, maybe in the end it will represent less than 3% of the global debt stock.
The key issue of trust between Nigeria and China, the guests believe, must be sustained so that the untapped resource base that is Africa is effectively harnessed.
Even now happens to be a very good time for us, because they tend to have a lot of trust, you know, for our president. Because they see him as somebody that is very honest, he has integrity.
They also emphasize that African leaders have the task of ensuring that the partnership succeeds and benefits are felt by the masses. Dennis Adegunloye, NTA News.
The Minister of Mines and Steel Development, Abubakar Bawa Buhari, is confident that Nigeria's effort at becoming self-sufficient in steel production is possible. The assurance was given at a two-day conference on metallurgy in Abuja. Mie Ogidi has more on that.
Participants at the conference decried the huge amount of money spent on importing steel by manufacturers, hence the need to look inwards.
To increase the gross domestic product. The northern part of Nigeria.
On our own, we know that we cannot achieve anything unless we partner with government, like we have always wanted to do.
Earlier, the chairman of the council who led the delegation, Jacob Buba Gyang, noted that there is need for close collaboration of all key players to tackle the issue of drug abuse by youths nationwide. And now to the environment. A heavy downpour has resulted in a devastating flood that claimed 7 lives in Ringem local government area of Jigawa State. Ibrahim Sani has the situation report.
The worst hit areas by the flood are the B and Kerama villages of the local government. The council chairman on assessment visit with officials of the State Emergency Management Agency confirms that the dead among the victims are women and children.
Many communities, about 6 out of 10 wards in the Ringi local government is affected with this flood.
The situation is also sympathetic as the inhabitants whose mud houses submerged by the disaster have been rendered homeless. They appeal to the state and federal government to come to their aid.
We had a sleepless night as we were caught unaware by the disaster.
Hardly will you have 1 or 2 that will be cholera.
He disclosed that Borno State government, in collaboration with development partners, has taken proactive measures by establishing rapid response teams at local government areas and state levels. This is in addition to active cases surveillance teams supported by health educators and personnel engaged in water, sanitation and hygiene services. Borno State government, he pointed out, had expressed worry over the attitude of residents who still defecate in the open, which spread harmful bacteria and germs, causing cholera, and called for proper toilet manner, hygiene and sanitation, as well as seeking prompt health care at designated centers. Residents have also been enjoined to report cases of vomiting and diarrhea immediately to health care providers through dedicated phone numbers for quick response. In Maiduguri, Jadwa John Jesni, NTA News.
In an effort to offer psychosocial support program to children affected by insurgency, a group of non-governmental organizations in Borno State has established a temporary learning center in Maiduguri at Moduganari Riverside area. Jesse Tafida reports.
The program by the NGOs was designed to protect children affected by the insurgency through rendering psychosocial and trauma support, case management and community education, hence establishment of temporary learning centers at some locations within Maiduguri. Executive Directors Nigeria Education, Becky Ryan, stressed the need for community leaders to make good use of the structure to enable the children acquire quality education. She said the NGO also supports training on business and entrepreneurship skills where beneficial
their agitations, the government and her development effort, the global development agenda, its 17 goals and 169 targets. We bring you all the deliberations, insightful conversations and high-level partnerships on the road to global destination. Agenda 2030, showing on this channel. Agenda 2030, leaving no one behind.
Yeah, Modena. Mode. Do you have amala? Yes. And amala. Yes, sir. Black or white? Yamala. Have I ever eaten white amala before? Yes, sir. Give me amala and amala. Do you have dodo? Dodo program. Good. Let me have some dodo. I want to put the meat in a bowl. Shaki, suku, abodi. I like my edo to be very tender. You have stockfish? Yes, sir. Good. Let's have some stockfish. And the catfish, my favorite. Don't mind them. You have eggs. I would like 6 boiled eggs. No eggs. Okay, the catfish will do. And then rice. Rice and then some salmon. Look. Do you have a guru?
Thanks for staying on. The Nigeria police has paraded the alleged informant who gave the false information that led to the raiding of the residence of former Commissioner of Information, Chief Edwin Clark, parading the suspect. The police public relations officer, Jimo Moshud, says the Inspector General of Police has also ordered the arrest and investigation of the 4 police personnel who carried out the raid.
Police, therefore, for us to know, has the statutory right, as enshrined in the Police Act and Regulation, to execute a duly obtained search warrant in any premises where it has actionable intelligence. Or go further to say that any officer who is to carry out the execution of search warrant must follow the laid-down procedures within the law. Where such is not followed, such an officer must be made to face the consequences of violating the rule of law.
So it was a white Hilux seal to enter. And when you enter, he said, this Hilux that is entering here is ammunition. I said, what ammunition? Me as an indigenous of FCT hearing this thing, while we are here in this FCT here, while peace-loving people, I can't take that.
Public relations officer says the police force did not order the raid on Chief Clark's residence and has sent a delegation to apologize to the former federal commissioner. Up next is Justin Bem Uni with happenings on the global scene.
Hello and welcome. Let's begin from Botswana, where the government has condemned as unsubstantiated and sensational the reports of a sharp rise in elephant poaching in the country, and this coincided with the disarmament of its anti-poaching unit. On Monday, scientists with Elephants Without Borders, who are carrying out a wildlife survey in Botswana, told the BBC that 87 dead elephants had been found close to the protected Okavango Delta Wildlife Sanctuary, which attracts tourists from around the world. Now to Angola, where reports quoting the office of the regional governor say at least 17 people have been killed and 12 others injured in a head-on collision between 2